Okay. Screen here. Okay, one of my least favorite topics to cover, violence and injury, especially towards the end. Well, let's get through it anyway. So we're going to talk about unintentional accidents or preventable, and then also intentional, where someone's setting out to hurt someone else. So we'll go through those. I'm going to do this fairly quickly because there's a lot of statistics you can read through yourself. Make sure that you get the statistics. They'll most likely be on the exam. And it's good to know to build kind of a case as to why people should or shouldn't consume alcohol or drugs, or what types of things are occurring that cause people to either be hurt unintentionally or intentionally. A loaded slide here, but it gives lots of good statistics. So when we look at preventable injuries, poisoning, motor vehicle, and falls account for 86%. So when we look at, it used to be in 2020, falls were the highest, and now in 2021, poisoning. So we've had a little switch there. So make sure you keep an eye on the statistics, which is interesting to me. I'm not sure where all the poisoning is coming from, but it is. So there you go. I want you to watch this video. It's about texting. It's a pretty good one. This was created in Europe and Britain, and for the dangers of texting and not paying attention of your surroundings. So it's a pretty interesting one. It's a little shocking at the end. I'm just warning you. But when we talk about unintentional injuries, it really is about paying attention to your surroundings. And because we all are on our phones, and some of you are really good about texting and walking, I still can't get the hang of it, but some of you can do that really well. Just watch the video and make sure that you're paying attention to your surroundings. Workplace injuries and deaths. So side by side, you can see and I should have done this better. But on the left is workplace injuries, and on the right is deaths. So as you can see, and they compare 20 to 21, logging workers, fishing, roofers, and you can see it's broken down by job. So anyway, there you go. Some more statistics for you to absorb. Understanding that, right, there's risks in everything that we do. Obviously, being a logger apparently is a pretty high risk. So when we look at some of the underlying causes of violence in the United States, a lot of it has to do with society. A lot of it has to do with our circumstances. But one of the big antecedents of violence is past violence. So if you come from a background that was violent and your parents were violent, then you're more likely to be so. Doesn't mean you're going to be. It's just it can be sort of a learned thing. So understanding that if you find yourself in that situation, or if you know somebody who is, just be more patient, and it's a lot more work to kind of get out of that learned behavior. We're going to look at antecedents. I just mentioned it. We have primary aggression and then reactive. Primary is goal-oriented. That's where somebody really wants to hurt you. They have the intent. And reactive is what we do when we get angry or frustrated with somebody else. So know that there's two different types. I think most of the time, we're reactive. Somebody cuts us off in traffic or yells at us for no reason or whatever, then we react to that. How we react is completely under our control. But that is probably the most common way that violence occurs, is reactive. Substance abuse and violence is linked. Here's some statistics here. And this is picked up from the World Health Organization, the Center for Disease Control, and the Bureau of Justice. So some pretty interesting statistics in here. Certainly there's a link between a substance abuse, whether it's alcohol, and typically it's alcohol or drug related. When we look at intentional injuries, homicide or murder comes into play, but that can also be considered suicide, where your own life is taken. In 2021, 48,000 plus deaths. That was up 36% from the previous years. COVID hit us hard when it came to suicide. 54% of those suicides were gun related. When we look at homicide, with the intent to kill somebody, there was about 26,000 reported in 2021. 43% of those were by gun. There has been an increase in violent crime, which is the first increase that we've had in a long time. It went up by about 4.6%. And that was violent crimes. Homicide rate really jumped up to 28.9%. That was a historic one-year increase. It'll be interesting to see what happens over the next couple of years. They see a trend that's slowly coming down again. That's starting to level and to come down again. But that was a big jump. It was like it's written in there, historic for a one-year increase. And then the relationship, if we look, there are less murders being closed, cases being closed. So there's less understanding of the victim perpetrator or offender relationship, which is a little bit frightening. We don't really know why people are murdering at an increased rate. But it's happening. And hopefully, as more of these cases are solved, there's will be a better understanding of the relationship between the offender and the victim. Bias and hate crimes is certainly on the rise. There's some definitions there that I think that you need to look at. Understand, right, that this is really what it comes down to is a lack of communication and understanding of different cultures and different ways of expressing ideas. So this is really it's like still a big thing in our society, especially in the United States and worldwide, with bias and hate crimes. So make sure you look at those definitions. Gang violence is still a thing, and it begins to kind of take over a culture, or as it takes over neighborhoods. Most gang members are younger, 12 to 22. There are some older ones, but they tend to run the gangs. Some of the factors that you can read there. Once again, if you look at statistically with the single parent homes and things like that and poverty levels, there's an influence with those things as well. Domestic violence hasn't changed much when we look at the new data. It's still about 1 in 3 women experiencing severe physical violence from somebody they know, which is, and if you look at some of the statistics, and they were in the old slides, much of that violence is alcohol related, or depending on where you see it, up towards 90% of all domestic violence has some sort of alcohol related to it. Although that percentage isn't in the slides anymore because there's mixed statistics out there, but the high is about 90%. I've seen the low somewhere around 35 or 40%. So the point is that typically alcohol is related or is correlated with domestic violence. There's certainly a cycle of violence. Here is the 3 phases, and you can kind of I think we can all relate to this just because we watch movies. We may have seen it in our own lives, but this is a very common cycle. Tension builds because somebody said something they don't like. There may be some yelling, maybe some pushing, and then there is an accelerated acts of violence where we start to hit harder or push harder, and then of course injury occurs, and then over time, hours or whatever, we begin to feel bad about what we did, and then there's this reconciliation process that goes on, and then then there's I'm sorry, and then there's this sort of forgiveness, and then it begins all over again, days or weeks later. So this cycle continues over and over again. And once again, if you think about the love relationship and the desire in our brains to really want to have a relationship, this cycle is hard to break because we feel like, I'm going to lose this person, even though this isn't a good situation to be in. And remember, this isn't just physical violence. It can be mental violence as well. I mean, people can be really mean to you and not allow you to have that sense of joy and live your life to the point, to the fullest, so to speak. And so it can be a mental abuse as well as a mental, emotional, as well as physical abuse. When we look at men and victims of spouse abuse, it's still about 1 in 4 experience severe physical violence. It tends to be underreported. So we're going to go with 1 in 4, but it tends to be underreported. Once again, there are alcohol is associated with domestic violence, poor anger management, poor communication. Here's some definitions for child abuse. This remains fairly consistent through time. If we look at data from year to year, this remains pretty consistent, which is a shame, obviously. There are some factors that contribute to child abuse, and they're listed below as under the bullet abusers. So poverty, depression, use of drugs, poor education, poor prospects as far as careers, things like that. To move on, certainly unhappy marriages. There is cases where it's split parents, step parents, live-in relationship with mom or dad that then contributes to the abuse. And obviously, it's not in every case, but when we see childhood abuse, those factors tend to play into childhood or child abuse. When we look at rape, there's some definitions for you there. Just to give you an idea that there are different types. When we look at them statistically, they do break them up into different types. Anytime though you exert your, power or influence over somebody else unwanted, is wrong, obviously, and it not only is it legally wrong, but it's morally wrong too. And it takes a long time for victims to overcome it if they ever do. Different types of rape. Most rape occurs that we know the person, they call it acquaintance, and that you're either in a relationship with, and then there's what we call with a former spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend. So those are the two top, and so most victims of rape know the person that has offended them. When we look at intentional injuries, most go unreported. Most of the time when we look at especially sexual assault, they tend to blame the victim. We do as a society. It was the way they dressed, the way they acted, the place that they put themselves in the wrong situation, all of that, is obviously the wrong approach to when we're trying to figure out why this is happening. Nobody asks to be sexually assaulted, right? So obviously we can do things, to put ourselves in the right situation. Obviously, if alcohol is involved, that's a big one. Obviously, if alcohol is involved, and then you put yourself in a place where you're among strangers who have the intent of harm, is a problem. So be really careful, I guess, is the point with this slide. We do have this prejudice in society, but remember what those prejudices are and kind of use them and say, all right, well, maybe there's some truth there, and the fact that I could be in a better place and maybe be around good friends and surround myself with friends if I'm going to go to places where there are higher incidents of this kind of stuff happening. Certainly there's some theories here. We have this idea that men are supposed to be tough, that there are movies that portray that and songs that portray that. And so there's this societal image that, there's, men can have their way with anybody or anything. There's also, like I said before, the societal norms that or thought that we have put ourselves in a position where we're asking for this kind of thing. All of that, honestly, poor behavior is poor behavior. It doesn't matter who it is or where it is. These are just theories, and obviously we can combat that by putting ourselves in good places surrounded by people we trust. I want you to read through these cases of pornography. They're just studies that have been done since the early 80s, and you'll see a trend here. Basically what the trend is the more pornography that's available, the greater the increase in sexual assault and rape. And that's consistent not only in the United States, but just about in every country that they've ever studied it in any time period. So there's a couple of slides of this. So these are 1984. This other one was a repeat of a 1985 study. So Those are older, right? And here's some more: 86, 91, 1974. So they've been studying pornography and its influence on sexual assault. And you'll read, I'm surprised because I still read other articles that have come out that say, oh, there really isn't a correlation. Well, apparently there is. I mean, there are been studies since, well, for the last 50 years that say there's a correlation between it. So something's going on with pornography. Some people have tried to identify what's going on in the brain with this, and why people are more likely to commit, or why I should say, sexual assault and rape goes up when pornography is more available. But there certainly is a correlation. Here is a video on that, so go ahead and watch that. It's a neurochemical process, and just like any drug, we become more and more accustomed to the drug, and therefore we search out new ways to make the drug more powerful, however that may be, and the same is true for pornography. When we look at campuses, there is an issue with violence on campuses, and not just sexual violence, but all kinds, burglary, things like that, bullying. And so they passed lots of laws, especially intending on protecting women against violence. So there's been a lot of money that's been passed on to help with this. It started in the 90s with the Clery Act. Actually, before that, but in the 90s, we started handing out a lot of funds. And then we had something called the Violence Against Women's Act, and then it just kept rolling through. Most of your federally funded institutions have this. They have reporting criteria for violent crimes and crimes on campuses to make sure that the money keeps coming in. Here at Eastern Arizona College, we participate in this. We receive federal funding to combat crime on campus. We're one of the safest campuses in the country, so that's awesome. Some of this money is used to pay for law enforcement, and some of the money that we receive, we pay for our campus police here at Eastern. This pertains to high school students as well. This is a very large number, and the Department of Education is opposed to these things. They are about the same. I haven't seen an update in the percentages, so whether they've done another study or not, this is kind of about where it's at. About 43% of college women report physical abuse in relationship, with 16 being sexually abused. That statistic still kind of holding true through the Department of Education. So as you can imagine, right, we're still going through there's still a lot going on in our brains in those age groups, and so we don't make really great decisions. And so not until well into our 20s that we start to have our logic centers, pretty firm and hopefully mature, and we make better decisions. So you can see why there's this trend in younger age groups to have so much dating violence and things like that. Sexual harassment is another one that's pretty pervasive in schools. It's out there and underreported, and it's out there. Stalking is another one that's underreported, but is out there as well. To reduce your risk, make sure that if you feel threatened, that you speak with a loud voice, you maintain eye contact. There have been some suggestions that you pull out your phone and you either record or pretend you're recording. And there are some apps that automatically go and save that to the cloud, and that can be used as evidence or for whatever. And the whole point here is to make a scene and to stand up for yourself, to do your best you can to not be intimidated by the contact that's occurring. And if by chance that the worst happens and that rape occurs, sexual assault occurs, it really is important to report it. Call 911 as soon as you can. Don't bathe or change clothes. Try to preserve the evidence. I know that sounds terrible, but it really is important to helping resolve a case. So make sure that you don't do that. And there's a rape hotline that you can use. You'll be given information at the hospital and receive counseling there as well. So I know here at our hospital, we have some great counselors and some great staff. I know most of them personally, and I think the same can be, I think the same is true for most hospitals. I think people do a really good job of handling these kind of cases nowadays. Here's one of the examples of something that's used that's used with the funding. Increased police officer force. If you've ever been on the campus of Arizona State University, they have emergency phones placed throughout their campus, and they're placed like every, I don't know, a couple hundred yards. You can see one right after the other when you're walking campus. And so I think that that's obviously on purpose, that they're always available, and there's help within minutes by picking one up. Matter of fact, don't pick one up messing around, because they'll be there and they'll ask you why you're picking it up. So don't pick up the phone unless it's on purpose. So anyway, okay, so there you go. There's violence for you. Please, once again, text, email if you have any questions, and review these slides again. Make sure you get those statistics down.